But today our topic is the mob's accountant, the corporate architecture of organized crime. We're going to explore how one quiet man, without ever holding a weapon, completely transformed violent street crime into a sophisticated, multinational corporation. We are, of course, talking about Meyer Lansky, the invisible architect of the underworld. Okay, let's dive into this wild paradox right out of the gate. The most powerful criminal in America never fired a gun, never ordered a hit, and actually died a free man in his own bed. Meyer Lansky was the ultimate mafia boss, right? Yet he was practically a ghost. I mean, here's a guy barely 5'4", wearing these quiet wire-rimmed glasses, who spent his evenings reading balance sheets rather than planning hits. Every single mob boss wanted his expertise, and literally every federal agent was hunting him. Yet after 40 years of intense surveillance and thousands of wiretaps, he died an innocent man in the eyes of the law, just feeding pigeons in a Miami park. He didn't build the mafia, but he absolutely made it rich.
And this dynamic really captures the whole startup phase of his empire. It was brains versus brawn. You had Meyer Lansky, who was calculated, mathematical, quiet, and highly strategic. Then you had Bugsy Siegel, who was fearless, impulsive, violent, and tactical. Growing up on the hyper-competitive streets of New York's Lower East Side, Lansky met Siegel, and they were just exact opposites. Siegel was the brute force, he provided the brawn. Lansky was the numbers guy, he provided the brains. Together, they started out running underground craps games. But Lansky realized something profound very early on. Violence is cheap, but organization is priceless. Turning theft into a reliable, repeatable system is what makes you truly irreplaceable.
Tracking the structure of this empire, we start in 1911 with his arrival in New York, then hit 1920 when Prohibition begins, 1933 when Prohibition ends, and jump to 1946 when the Vegas Flamingo opens. Lansky's rise was incredibly fast. Arriving in New York as a young boy fleeing state-sponsored pogroms in the Russian Empire, he learned early that survival meant being clever. So when Prohibition hit in 1920, the government essentially handed organized crime a total monopoly on alcohol. While other gangs were literally shooting each other over city blocks, Lansky saw a historic business opportunity. And his vision didn't stop there. When the alcohol started flowing legally again, he seamlessly pivoted to the next great American vice by helping open the Flamingo in Las Vegas, building a massive new empire right in the middle of the desert. This brings us to the National Crime Syndicate, a cooperative multi-ethnic cartel that ended violent gang wars by dividing territories and sharing intelligence just like a corporate board. What's truly fascinating here is how Lansky acted way less like a mobster and much more like a modern CFO. During Prohibition, the violence between rival Italian and Jewish gangs was just completely out of control. So Lansky brokers a summit and pitches a radical idea. He literally sits down with famous bosses, guys like Lucky Luciano, and just shows them the numbers. He explains that killing each other is absolutely terrible for the bottom line. He convinced them to divide up the territories and share intelligence, effectively creating a corporate cartel that ended the bloodshed and maximized everyone's profits.
But then they hit a wall, the invisible wealth problem. Bootlegger cash cannot be spent openly without raising questions. It was solved by offshore Swiss accounts with no subpoenas, layered through anonymous paper shell companies, and cleaned through legitimate real estate investments. See, criminal wealth is completely useless if the government can see it. If you suddenly deposit $100,000 in cash, the IRS is going to ask questions you simply cannot answer. Your money just sits there, dangerous and totally inert. Lansky understood this problem before anyone else, and he systematically solved it. He discovered offshore banking, set up anonymous paper shell companies, and bought real estate to absorb the dirty cash. He was quite literally inventing the architecture of modern money laundering.
And that leads us to his absolute masterpiece, the Lansky scam. Step 1. Intercept the cash directly in the casino counting room. Step 2. Move that untracked cash by briefcase to Miami or Zurich. Step 3. Deposit the funds into offshore shell companies. And step 4, it re-enters the global economy as completely clean, legitimate wealth. As he expanded his empire into casinos, he perfected this seamless way to clean money. Before the casino's daily revenue was even officially recorded, Lansky's men would intercept a chunk of the cash right there in the counting room. That untracked cash goes into a briefcase, flies to Zurich, hits those shell companies, and quietly trickles back into the global economy. It was an incredibly elegant, foolproof system. Picture a single night at the casino. 83% is reported as legitimate revenue, while 17% is skimmed as completely untraceable cash. Let's say one of his spectacular casinos makes $3 million in a night. They officially report 83% of it, so about $2.5 million, and they happily pay taxes on it, keeping the government off their backs. But that remaining 17%, that $500,000, it just vanishes. Poof! Because it was never officially tallied, there was absolutely zero paper trail. The FBI had informants and a ton of circumstantial evidence, sure, but this mathematical skimming left them totally confounded and empty-handed.
And he took this system to its absolute zenith in 1950s Havana, essentially buying a country through a partnership with President Fulgencio Batista. Lansky didn't just buy a few local politicians, he brokered a complete state capture. He formed a direct handshake partnership with Cuba's president, which was reportedly sealed with a cool $3 million cash bribe. In return, Lansky got to build these luxurious, totally rigged resorts like the Hotel Riviera under the official, fully purchased blindness of the Cuban government. Havana became the ultimate playground for American celebrities, and beneath all that glamour, Lansky's money machine just hummed along flawlessly. But what happens when history interrupts the math? He had calculated every single financial variable, right? He had the politicians, the bankers, the lawyers, and the mob bosses perfectly aligned. But we have to ask, what happens when a totally unpredictable historical event drops right into the equation? You can engineer the perfect corporate crime structure, but you cannot engineer history.
New Year's Eve, 1958. Fidel Castro seizes Havana, the casinos close, the accounts freeze, and the empire falls literally overnight. The Cuban Revolution was the one wild card his brilliant mind just couldn't plan for. As Lansky was standing in his own casino, news breaks that Castro's rebel forces are seizing the country. Batista flees, the music stops. By the very next morning, the casinos were shuttered, the bank accounts were frozen solid, and the hotels were nationalized. In a single night, Lansky lost hundreds of millions of dollars. It was the greatest accumulation of mob wealth in history, wiped out entirely by one man's revolution. And then the net closes. In the 1960s, we see a relentless FBI crackdown. By 1970, he flees to Israel. In 1972, the Israeli Supreme Court actually denies him asylum. And then in 1973, he's somehow acquitted of tax evasion. Following that massive loss in Cuba, the FBI smelled blood in the water. With indictments looming, Lansky makes this stunning move to flee to Israel, claiming citizenship. But the U.S. government applies massive pressure, forcing him back to the States to face trial for tax evasion, the exact same charge that took down Al Capone. But remarkably, Lansky was acquitted. The government's case completely dissolved under the sheer complexity of his financial architecture.
So what is Lansky's enduring legacy? Well, he organized political corruption at an unprecedented scale. He proved that financial sophistication is vastly more powerful than street violence. He created the exact template for modern global money laundering, and his methods are literally still used by modern cartels and corrupt officials today. Despite having zero formal education past the age of 14, Lansky died a free man in 1983, but his legacy is chilling. He didn't just organize crime, he proved that intelligence wins. The specific techniques he pioneered, the skim, the shell companies, the offshore jurisdictions, became the blueprint. When a modern cartel hides their money today, they are reading directly from Meyer Lansky's playbook. $800 billion to $2 trillion. Just let that sink in for a second. To put the scale of his innovations into perspective today, according to the United Nations, between $800 billion and $2 trillion are laundered globally every single year. That represents up to 5% of the entire global GDP. This isn't just a piece of history, you guys. This is the direct, ongoing economic consequence of Lansky's innovations. This staggering amount of money is moving through our global economy right now using the exact invisible systems designed by that quiet kid from the Lower East Side.
We're bigger than U.S. Steel. That is a direct quote from Meyer Lansky, and it's absolutely wild to think about. By comparing his syndicate to one of the most dominant legitimate corporations of the 20th century, Lansky was reminding everyone of the sheer corporate reality of a shadowy empire. He literally transformed a bunch of thugs and bootleggers into a multinational financial powerhouse, operating right under the nose of the authorities.
So, we have to ask, if pure intelligence is more dangerous than any weapon, who is quietly balancing the ledgers of the underworld today? Ultimately, Lansky proved that pure, cold intelligence properly hidden is the most dangerous weapon in the world. He was the absolute master of invisibility, the ability to be the most powerful person in the room while leaving absolutely no fingerprints. So looking at the modern criminal underworld today, with trillions of dollars flowing invisibly across borders, who are the brilliant, quiet architects using Meyer Lansky's ledgers right now? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the structures you can't see.